Welcome back to the Rugby Historian. Today, we will be reviewing the Six Nations, looking back at what this weekend's fixtures did to the rankings, as well as taking a look at the rankings for the whole tournament and how they changed, who were the winners and who were the losers. After that, we'll be looking at the tournament as a whole, looking at a few interesting trends, records, and historical quirks that we've picked up as the tournament has gone along. Plus, we'll be reviewing the Rugby Europe Championship, looking at how Super Sunday's fixtures impacted the rankings as Portugal won, surprisingly, and also looking at how the rankings of the teams developed over the course of the whole tournament. And then as a final part, our only preview for this weekend, we have one fixture, Croatia versus Andorra, the women's teams of those two nations taking on each other. We'll do a little preview of that and also take a bit of a broader look at the development of the women's game over the past few years. Okay, let's get going and look at the Six Nations. So this weekend, France won the Six Nations with the last kick of their game against England. Ireland beat the Scots again in Dublin, and Wales overcame Italy to record their first win since 2023 in the men's Six Nations. My predictions were quite wrong. If it wasn't for Thomas Ramos's kick towards the end, I would have gotten 0 for 3 out of my predictions, as someone said in the YouTube comments. So yeah, at least this weekend I'm not really predicting anything, so I can't be that wrong again. Those fixtures didn't do much to the rankings at all. Everyone stayed exactly where they were, position-wise, except Wales, who moved up to 11th. Ireland are in 3rd, France are in 4th, England stay in 6th, Scotland are in 7th, and Italy stay in 10th, missing the opportunity to go into 8th above Australia and Fiji with a win. Okay, so this weekend, not much happened, but over the course of the campaign, there were quite a few shifts, and we're going to dive into those now. France, let's start with the champion. They started the tournament in 5th, their lowest ranking since November 2021 when they were ranked 6th. But they finished in 4th after going 3rd briefly for 1 week after England lost to Scotland. As England fell down the rankings, they briefly nudged into 3rd, but then fell down to 4th to end the campaign there. So they've gained 1 spot over the course of the campaign. Ireland started the championship in 4th, fell to 5th after losing to France on the opening weekend, but then rebounded and moved into 3rd after beating England at Twickenham. Their brief fall to 5th was the lowest ranking for Ireland since February 2022, but they've rebounded well and now sit just over a point behind New Zealand, and they play them this year in the Nations Championship. So that's one to look out for to see if they can move up to 2nd. Scotland started in 9th, which was their lowest ranking since February 2016, and that got worse when they fell to 10 after losing to Italy on the opening weekend. They then moved up to 9th after beating England, and then 7th after beating Wales. They closed the gap to the top 6 after their win over France, but missed an opportunity with their final weekend defeat. They could have moved up to 6th, given that England had lost. Italy started in 10th and finished in 10th. They briefly went to 9th after their win over Scotland on the opening weekend, but ultimately they finished right where they started. They've been in 10th for most of the time since November 2024. Their last weekend defeat to Wales really hurt. It would have been a massive step up to go back to 8th. Wales started in 11th and finished the tournament in 11th, but they did briefly drop to 12th when they played Scotland. They then won against Italy on last weekend, as I said, which boosted them back up into 11th and gave them a bit of daylight over Japan and Georgia, who we will get onto later. And then finally, England. They have been the biggest losers this Six Nations. They started the campaign in 3rd, won their first game against Wales, but because of the ranking gap, there was no change in their rankings. Then they lost the next 4 games and fell from 3rd to 6th. It could have been worse. If Scotland had won on the last weekend, they might have ended up in 7th. Okay, in part 2, we'll be looking at a few of the trends and records that emerged from this 2026 Six Nations, starting with France now overtaking England for the most Six Nations title, sitting on 8 and moving one above England on 7. 4 of those 8 have been Grand Slams. In the overall tables, since the Six Nations began as the home nations and then the Five Nations Championship, France now sit on 28 wins, 11 behind both Wales and England, who are still tied on 39. The English and Welsh have, however, competed in 130 and 132 tournaments respectively, while France have only competed in 97. They joined late and then were excluded for a while before rejoining to make it the Five Nations Championship. Talking about winning, Ireland won their 9th Triple Crown in the Six Nations era, 4 more than England and Wales on 5, and 9 more than Scotland, who haven't won it since the Six Nations started in 2000. Ireland have won the last 4 Triple Crowns, 2022, 2023, 2025, and now 2026. Overall, England have 26 Triple Crowns, Wales have 22, Ireland have 15, and Scotland have 10. The Irish won their first Triple Crown in 1894, when the Irish newspaper, the Irish Times, first used the term Triple Crown in their match report. Then, an interesting trend which emerged in this Six Nations is the win percentage for home teams. For the first time ever, 80% of the games, or 12 fixtures, were won by the home team. The only time this has been a higher percentage was in 1973, when all 5 nations won their home games, with each team finishing on 4 points and sharing the title, a 5-way tie for the title in 1973. At that stage, they didn't use any tiebreakers like points difference or head-to-head, so it was split 5 ways. A 100% win record for home teams happened in 1888 as well, but England were excluded from the championship that year because they refused to join the International Rugby Football Board. It also happened in 1897, but again, only 4 games took place as Wales withdrew from the International Rugby Football Board after playing only 1 match. So it has happened before that there's been a 100% win rate, but only on 3 occasions, and 2 of those have a bit of a caveat to them. Now moving on to a record with the most tries ever scored in a Six Nations edition in 2026. The tournament saw 111 tries scored at 7.4 per match, with France scoring 30 tries in back-to-back seasons. The 2026 edition also saw the second highest number of points scored in the tournament's history, just 7 behind last year's 829 points. The third highest was actually in 2000, but in that year they only scored 75 tries at 5 per match. The lowest number of points scored in a single tournament was 534 back in 2013, which saw only 37 tries as well. That's an average of 2.5 per game. We have certainly come a long way since then. And then lastly, we move on to drop goals. What a rarity that is in our game these days. Dan Evans's drop goal against Italy was the first one since 2024, when Marcus Smith dropped over to beat the Irish in Twickenham. Since the Six Nations started, there's been 104 drop goals, with Johnny Wilkinson holding the record with 11. Since 2012, between 2012 and 2026, there's only been 24 drop goals, whereas between 2000 and 2011, they were 80. 2003 and 2010 saw the record number of drops scored in a single season with 11. For part 2, let's move on to the Rugby Europe Championship, which concluded on Sunday when Portugal defeated Georgia 1917 to break the Georgians' run of 8 successive wins in the tournament. The reward for the Portuguese was to move up to 14th in the rankings, the highest they've been since January 2024 when they were ranked 13th. Georgia stayed in 13th but lost a number of ranking points, and the gap between the two teams have now dropped from 5.37 to 2.3. In the third place playoff, Spain defeated Romania but gained very little and stayed in 17th, while the Oaks dropped to 22nd. Belgium moved into 21st when they won the 5th and 6th place playoff against Switzerland to finish 5th for back-to-back tournaments. Switzerland slipped down one place to 28th behind the Netherlands. The Dutch signed off the tournament on a high note after beating Germany 76-7 to finish in 7th place. Germany slipped down 2 places as a result, back to 31st where they started the tournament. 5 teams finished the REC in exactly the same spot they started. Only Portugal rose up the rankings, jumping 6 spots to 14th and leapfrogging their Iberian rivals Spain in the process. The Spaniards have slipped down 2 spots to 17th, the same position they were in March last year. The Netherlands are the only team to lose ground in the rankings, dropping down 1 spot to 27th. They only won 1 game this year against the relegated Germans. Points-wise, Portugal were the big winners. They gained 5.66 ranking points and caught up considerably with Georgia, who have for some time stood quite apart from the rest of their Rugby Europe Championship opponents. The biggest losers came from Spain and Belgium, with the Spaniards dropping 1.5 ranking points and the Belgians dropping down 1.29 ranking points. So that was the Rugby Europe Championship. Very exciting tournament that saw Portugal win the tournament for the first time in a long time, while Germany were relegated back to the Rugby Europe trophy. Lastly, let's take a look at the only game happening this weekend that will have a bearing on the world rankings, as Croatia's women take on Andorra in a historic game for both sides. Before we get to the preview, let's just take a step back and look at the progress of the women's game in the last year or so. Since the start of last year, 4 teams have joined the rankings, as Austria, Malaysia, Georgia and Poland played their first official test matches. This weekend, another team will join the family as Greece play Bulgaria in the Rugby Europe Conference. That means the number of women's teams in the rankings will have grown to 70. The Rugby Europe Conference is in effect the 4th tier of women's rugby in Europe and is still very much in its beginning stages, with rugby unions having to organize games internally between each other. There's also not a ranking system this year, so there will be no winner of the Rugby Europe Conference. Hopefully, the tournament grows considerably over the next few years, with regular matches and regular teams competing and gaining promotion to the Rugby Europe Trophy. Now let's move on to the preview, with Croatia taking on Andorra. This is the Croatians' 4th ever game and Andorra's 2nd ever game, 2 years after their first. Interestingly, both these teams made their debut in the rankings against Bulgaria, as Greece will do this weekend as well. As an aside, that first game between Croatia and Bulgaria had quite a few quirks in it. For one, 2 of the players had never played rugby before that game, and secondly, the coach subbed herself on in the second half. Very interesting, not something I've ever heard of, a player manager in rugby. Rankings wise, the teams are very close, of course. They both very recently joined the rankings, so they're close to that 40-point total that a new team in the women's ranking gets when they enter the rankings. Croatia on 39th and Andorra are on 35th, only split by 0.89 points. As a result, a win for either team will see big movements. If Croatia win, they would move up 3 places to 36th. A win by more than 15 and they would move all the way up to 35th. Conversely, Andorra would move to 33rd with a win and 30th with a 15 plus win. So there's a lot at stake in the game, but at the end of the day, what matters most is development of the game in both those countries. Okay, so there we have it. The top 2 tiers of men's rugby in Europe is now done and dusted, with probably the best ever tournaments for both coming in 2026. We now turn our attention to the women's game and look forward to the women's version of the Six Nations, and hopefully that can be just as exciting. We'll be previewing all of those games as well and seeing how they could affect the rankings. Stay tuned to the channel. We will be uploading a few different types of videos, hopefully in the near future, looking at the history of the game, probably looking at Wales and their storied number 10 jersey. Thank you for tuning in. Again, if you like what we do here, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one. Ciao.